Good morning, good morning. You're waking up with Tay, and this is episode 22 of Good Morning Bay. In this episode, we will be continuing our series, The Artist's Way Every Single Day, coming from this lovely book by Julia Cameron. We are on week 5. Moment of transparency, y'all. I'm tired. I'm really tired. So this week we will be staying inside of the house and we'll be watching a movie. All right, let's slip on something a little bit more comfortable. Whenever I am feeling very, very drained and uninspired, I refer to this other book. It's called Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice by Napoleon Hill and Dennis Cambro. Not too much on my book. It's very well loved. But page 100 has a literal recipe for motivation. It says, look for mentors. Mentors who are larger than life expand us. Mentors in different fields broaden us. And deceased mentors inspire us. One of my favorite deceased mentors is John Burks Gillespie, aka Dizzy Gillespie. So we're gonna make us something to eat for breakfast and we're gonna watch A Night in Havana, Dizzy Gillespie in Cuba. By the time I was 2.5 years old, Dizzy Gillespie had already passed away, January 1993. But every time I hear him talk, especially today, I feel like I'm the only person in the room.
This lady, that's what she said, you trumpet players, you have a lot more wind. I said, no, we don't. She said, well, how does the strength come? I said, well, everybody says that the strength comes from your diaphragm. I said, well, that's not true. She said, well, where does the strength come from? I said, you really want to know? She said, yes. I said, it comes from your...
This documentary hits home for me and adds context and color to my grandfather's migration from Cuba to the United States. The world will always know Dizzy as America's first jazz ambassador, a literal representative elected by the U.S. Department of Education that travels the world playing jazz music. To me, he symbolizes America's only unique contribution to the world, chattel slavery and jazz. As an African-American descended from slaves and one of the founding fathers of bebop, Dizzy represents both of these concepts that started in America and eventually trended worldwide. A lifetime musician since age 4, hearing Cuban music by age 20 completely changed the trajectory of his sound and career. By 20, he moved to New York to replace second trumpeter Frankie Newton in Teddy Hill's orchestra M37. And in the very same year, Machito and his Afro-Cubans arrived in New York, changing how we hear jazz and its orchestration to this day. In 1940, Dizzy married Lorraine, a professional dancer, and I can only imagine what rehearsals in their house looked like. About a year later, Dizzy played in Cab Calloway's band, and he met a member of Machito's band, Mario Bausa. The fusion of Afro-Cuban rhythms and jazz intrigued them both, eventually creating what we know today as Afro-Cuban jazz. Bausa's rhythms, in combination with Dizzy's style of jazz, which he called bebop, became their iconic sound. Bebop was swing music and traditional jazz's sonic love child. It's known for its fast tempos, complex melodic lines, and heavy improvisation. By 1945, Dizzy had organized his own big band, which of course included Bausa, who still played with Machito. As a member of both bands, Bausa was a literal point of connection between Dizzy's bebop and Machito's Afro-Cuban jazz, helping to establish the iconic new style of Afro-Cuban jazz. By May and June of that year, they were recording his album Afro, which featured his iconic jazz standard A Night in Tunisia, this documentary's namesake. Together, the two created unique arrangements, chord progressions, and attended jams, which helped to tweak and refine their sound. A couple years later, in 1947, Bausa introduced Dizzy to Congo player Chano Poso, who Dizzy talks a lot about extensively in this documentary as they were close. The next 30 years move in cycles of touring, recording, and releasing music, each round intensifying with more funding and international renown. In 1947, Dizzy spent a couple of years making his band, among them musicians like John Coltrane. They traveled and toured, and by 1950, it disbanded and he continued touring and recording with small groups, releasing albums with musicians like Stan Getz. A few years later, he's touring as a band leader, and funding for jazz music is booming as bebop's on the radio and popularizing. He began touring much more internationally after being appointed by Eisenhower for a cultural exchange program in 1956. Dizzy gets the band back together for an international tour while he's still doing jazz festivals and performing in small groups. Critics are noticing how he shows stylistic range and expands the global jazz vocabulary to include specific Afro-Cuban rhythms and arrangements. By 1960, he becomes more politically involved, personally and professionally, and even ran for president in 1964. And after his last major tour with the Giants of Jazz in 1970, we find him traveling to Cuba in this documentary, just before he would receive a long overdue Lifetime Achievement Award. Dizzy Gillespie is a prime example of the momentum that happens when you consistently apply yourself to a unique vision and get resourceful, kind of like a snowball effect. At first, only you can give it motion, but depending on the landscape, and in this landscape, it was inclined to investing in Afro-Cuban jazz. Things inclined in this way with this much momentum grow into things that become their own movement, to the point where cultures that otherwise would have no interaction now have a world-renowned intersection to call their own. Although Dizzy was not himself culturally or ethnically Cuban, he was able to find an emerging community and immerse himself and his skill set to create something different. And that something literally went on to be iconic to jazz. I'm inspired in that I have so many different artistic skill sets, and sometimes I can feel disjointed. But even if I find one group of people who are doing something similar or interesting when combined with mine, the sky is the limit for what we can create. This is how the artist's way evolves us and echoes into our art.
The way that I do.
Being Afro-Cuban myself, it's incredible to witness his journey through America and his journey through Cuba, specifically the integration of Cuban rhythms in jazz music. I can't help but wonder, as a trained African dancer and a lifelong alto saxophonist, what would a Black woman leading a dance class while playing music look like? This has to be my next adventure as an artist. I've witnessed something similar once at Dance Africa DC, when we were taught both a song and a dance simultaneously. But until next week, check out the rest of my Artist Way Everyday series and enjoy the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.